They told me 2 years in minimum security was a small price to keep the family name clean. My dad slid a folder across the desk like he was ordering takeout, and my mom kept rubbing my sister's back like she was the victim. I did not yell. I asked for 24 hours to think, then drove off and did the one thing they never expected. I audited my own life and found the crime scene they had been hiding in my name. My name is Isla Simmons, and I have known since I was 7 years old that I was the backup plan. You know the type. The spare tire kept in the dark trunk, just in case the shiny, expensive wheel goes flat on the highway. But realizing you are a spare tire is one thing. Having your parents try to bolt you onto a burning car is entirely another. The call had come in at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was not a request. It was a summons. My mother, Diane, had used that specific tone she reserves for when the housekeeper breaks a crystal flute, tight, breathless, and bordering on hysterical. She told me to come to the main house immediately. She said it was a family emergency. Naturally, I assumed someone had died, or perhaps Sloan had chipped a veneer right before a photo shoot. When I pulled my sedan into the driveway of the Holloway estate, the house looked as imposing as ever. It was a sprawling colonial revival that screamed old money. Even though everyone in town knew my father, Graham Holloway, had made his fortune in mid-tier commercial real estate in the 80s. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. The windows gleamed. It was the perfect stage for the perfect family. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, flattened a stray hair, and prepared myself to play the role of the dull, obedient daughter. I walked into the study, and the air conditioner was set so low it felt like walking into a meat locker. My father was sitting behind his mahogany desk, a massive piece of furniture that he used like a barricade. My mother was perched on the arm of the leather sofa, her hand making soothing, circular motions on my sister's back. Sloan was crying. That was the first red flag. Sloan did not cry. Sloan threw tantrums. She threw vases. She threw insults. But she did not weep unless she had an audience and a script. Today, she was curled up in a cashmere throw, her face buried in her hands, making sounds that were meant to evoke sympathy, but only made my stomach turn. "Sit down, Isla," my father said. He did not look up from the papers in front of him. I sat in the stiff wooden chair opposite the desk. It was lower than his chair, a subtle architectural choice meant to make anyone sitting there feel small. I folded my hands in my lap. "What is going on?" I asked. "Is everyone okay?" Diane looked up, her eyes rimmed with red that matched her lipstick perfectly. "Oh, Isla, it is a disaster, just a complete disaster. We did not know who else to turn to." My father finally looked at me. His face was gray, the kind of pallor that comes from sleepless nights and looming audits. He reached for a thick manila folder on his desk and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped exactly at the edge, right in front of me. It was heavy. "Open it," he ordered. I flipped the cover. Inside, I saw bank statements, tax filings, invoices. It took me less than 10 seconds to recognize what I was looking at, but I kept my face blank. These were financial records for Lumina, the boutique lifestyle brand my parents had funded for Sloan 3 years ago. It was supposed to be her big break, a company selling high-end candles and wellness retreats to bored housewives, according to the papers in front of me. Lumina was not just failing, it was a criminal enterprise. I saw gross receipts that did not match the deposits. I saw write-offs for personal expenses that were so egregious it was almost funny. First-class tickets to the Maldives listed as market research. A Porsche lease disguised as company logistics. But the real kicker was the tax returns. They had been falsified, badly. Someone had underreported income by nearly 60% over 2 fiscal years. I looked up. Who did this? Sloan let out a fresh wail. "It was an accident," she sobbed, lifting her head. Her mascara was artfully smudged. "I just got confused with the accounts. Isla, I hired that accountant Dad recommended, and he said it was fine to move money around. And then the letters started coming from the IRS, and I panicked." My father cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. It does not matter how it happened. What matters is the timing. He leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. The Caldwell merger, he said. He meant the wedding. In 6 weeks, Sloan was scheduled to marry Evan Caldwell. The Caldwells were not just rich. They were political royalty in this state. Evan was running for district attorney next year. His family vetted everyone who came within 10 feet of them. If this comes out, my father said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. The wedding is off. The Caldwells will not just pull out. They will destroy us to distance themselves. Sloan will be ruined. The investigation alone will be front-page news. I looked back down at the dossier. This is tax fraud, Dad, and embezzlement. This is not a parking ticket. We know what it is. Isla, my mother snapped, her voice shrill. That is why you are here. I frowned, genuinely confused for a split second. What do you want me to do? I cannot fix these numbers. The filings are already submitted. The paper trail is cemented. My father exhaled, a long stream of air through his nose. We do not need you to fix the numbers, he said. We need you to own them. The room went so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. It sounded like a hammer hitting a nail. Excuse me? I asked. Sloan sniffled, wiping her nose with a tissue. Isla, you know I cannot handle prison. I would die in there. I am too fragile. You know that. My father took over, his tone shifting into the pragmatic cadence of a man negotiating a property deal. Listen to me. Isla, Sloan is about to marry into the Caldwell family. This union secures our family's legacy for the next 3 generations. If she is indicted, everything falls apart. But you, he gestured vaguely at me, as if encompassing my entire existence in a single, dismissive wave. You are single. You have a quiet life. You work in that administrative office doing data entry. If you take the fall, the narrative changes. We can spin it. We can say you were the acting CFO of Lumina. We can say you managed the books. That Sloan was just the creative face and knew nothing about the finances. She was the victim of her own sister's greed. I sat there, frozen. I felt the blood draining out of my face, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent clarity. You want me to go to prison? I said slowly, for her. My mother stood up and walked over to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. Her touch felt like ice. It would not be for long. Sweetie, your father has spoken to our lawyers. If we get ahead of this, if you surrender and confess before the indictment drops, we can cut a deal, minimum security, 18 months, maybe 2 years tops. 2 years. I repeated, 2 years, my father said, nodding as if he were agreeing to a reasonable interest rate. 2 years in minimum security will not kill you. Isla, it is a camp. You will read books. You will work in the library. And when you get out, he paused, opening a desk drawer and pulling out a checkbook. When you get out, we will make sure you are taken care of. We will pay off your student loans. We will buy you an apartment. You will have a fresh start. $500,000. Isla, tax-free, because we will route it as a gift. I looked at the checkbook. Then I looked at Sloan. She was watching me with wet, hopeful eyes, like a child waiting for a toy. She did not look guilty. She looked entitled. She truly believed that my life was a currency she could spend to save her own. They had planned this. They had sat around this dinner table, eaten roast chicken, and discussed the fact that I was the expendable one. Sloan was the asset. I was the liability insurance. A dark, cold laughter bubbled up in my chest, but I strangled it before it could reach my throat. If I screamed, they would see my anger. If I argued, they would see my intelligence. And right now, my greatest weapon was their absolute ignorance of who I really was. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my hands to tremble, just enough for them to see the vibration in my fingers. I don't know, I stammered, pitching my voice to sound thin and terrified. 2 years? That is a long time. I have a job. I have a lease. Your job is nothing, my father said dismissively. You make, what, $40,000 a year filing papers? You can find another job like that anywhere. As for the lease, we will break it for you. Diane squeezed my shoulders. Think of your sister, Isla. She finally found happiness. Do you really want to be the reason she loses everything? Do you want to destroy this family? The manipulation was so clumsy it was almost insulting. But I let a tear leak out of my left eye. I had practiced that in the mirror years ago, though I never thought I would use it on them. I need to think, I whispered. Graham slammed his hand on the desk, startling me, or rather, startling the version of me I was presenting to them. There is no time to think. The auditors could be calling the district attorney by Monday. We need to have the confession drafted and signed by tomorrow morning. Please, I said, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. Just give me tonight. It is a lot to process. I need to go home, pack a bag. Maybe say goodbye to my cat. Please, Dad. Just 24 hours. My father exchanged a look with my mother. Diane nodded slightly. Fine, he grunted. 24 hours. But you be back here tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the evening sharp. And do not talk to anyone. If you breathe a word of this to a soul, the deal is off, and we leave you to rot. Do you understand? I nodded. I understand. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to walk slowly to the door. I did not look back at Sloane. I knew if I saw her face, I might actually vomit on the Persian rug. I walked out of the study, down the long hallway lined with portraits of ancestors who would probably roll over in their graves if they knew what Graham Holloway was proposing, and out the front door. The evening air was humid. I marched to my car, a 5-year-old sedan that my father constantly made fun of, and got in. I locked the doors. I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be firewood? That is what I was to them. They were cold, so they looked at me and saw something they could burn to keep themselves warm. It was not personal. That was the worst part. They did not hate me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires acknowledging that the other person is a human being capable of hurting you. They did not hate me. They simply did not value me. To them, I was a resource, a line item, a sunk cost that could finally be liquidated for a return on investment. I started the car and drove away. I did not go home. I drove toward the city, the lights of the suburbs fading in my rear-view mirror. I pulled into the back lot of a 24-hour diner about 10 miles away from my apartment. I parked in the darkest corner, under a flickering sodium light that buzzed like an angry insect. I reclined my seat and stared at the fabric roof of my car. 2 years. 2 years in minimum security won't kill you. I closed my eyes and let the replay of the meeting wash over me. I analyzed it, not as a daughter, but as a professional. They had made a critical error, a fatal error. Really, they based their entire plan on a single premise, that Isla Simmons is a simple, low-level office drone who barely scrapes by. They think I work in data entry at a logistics firm. They think I am passive, not very bright, and desperate for their approval. They never asked why I drive a cheap car. They never asked why I never talk about my work. They never asked why I live in a modest apartment despite having a master's degree in accounting and a certification in fraud examination. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my work badge. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. Isla Simmons, Senior Forensic Auditor, Bishop Row Litigation Group. My parents thought I filed papers. In reality, I hunt people like them for a living. I spend my days tearing apart the financial lives of corrupt CEOs, hiding spouses, and embezzlers. I trace shell companies through 3 layers of offshore jurisdictions. I find the money people think they have buried deep enough that God himself couldn't see it. I reconstruct shattered ledgers and turn numbers into prison sentences. I looked at the badge, then threw it onto the passenger seat. They wanted me to audit my life? Fine. I opened my laptop bag, which was sitting on the floorboard. It wasn't the cheap Dell they thought I owned. It was a high-powered machine with encrypted drives and proprietary software that cost more than Sloane's wedding dress. I booted it up. The screen glowed blue in the dark car. They gave me 24 hours to think. I didn't need 24 hours to think. I needed 24 hours to work if they wanted a criminal in the family. I was going to give them one, but it wasn't going to be me. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the silence of the car. Let's see what else you are hiding. Dad, I whispered to the empty air. I began to type. The neon sign of the diner flickered in the periphery of my vision, casting a rhythmic, sickly pink light over the dashboard of my sedan. I did not go inside. I could not stomach the smell of grease and burnt coffee, nor could I handle the pitying look of a waitress wondering why a woman in a business suit was sitting alone in a parking lot at 9 o'clock at night. Instead, I turned my car into a mobile command center. My laptop was balanced precariously on the center console, tethered to my phone's hotspot. The fan of the computer whirred, struggling against the humidity of the night, a mechanical breath in the silence. I cracked a window just an inch. The air outside smelled of rain and exhaust. I took a deep breath, compartmentalizing the daughter who had just been asked to go to prison, and bringing the forensic auditor to the surface. In my line of work, we have a saying, the numbers never lie, but they can be made to sing a very deceptive song if you do not know the tune. My parents thought they had composed a masterpiece of manipulation. They thought I was the audience. They had no idea I was the conductor. I navigated to the credit bureau portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. A final flinch of the old Isla, the one who was afraid of what she might find. I expected to see the usual debris of a millennial life. Perhaps a few missed payments from my graduate school days, or the high balance on my student loans that I had been chipping away at for years. I typed in my social security number, my date of birth, and the answers to the security questions, my first pet, the street I grew up on. The irony that my parents knew these answers better than anyone else did not escape me. The page loaded. The air left my lungs, not in a gasp, but in a slow, silent evacuation. 542. My credit score was 542. It was impossible. I was meticulous. I paid my rent early. I paid my utility bills the day they arrived. I drove a car that was fully paid off because I terrified myself with the idea of debt. A score of 542 belonged to someone who had driven their financial life off a cliff and watched it burn. I scrolled down to the summary of accounts, my eyes scanning the data with the detached precision of a surgeon looking for a tumor. I expected to see 3 open lines of credit: my primary checking account, my savings, and 1 credit card with a limit of $2,000 that I kept for emergencies. Instead, I saw a list that scrolled off the bottom of the screen. There were 17 open accounts. 17. My heart hammered against my ribs. A dull, heavy rhythm. I clicked on the first unfamiliar trade line. It was a platinum rewards card from American Express, opened 4 years ago. The limit was $50,000. The current balance was $48,912. The payment status was 90 days past due. I clicked on the next one. A Chase Sapphire Reserve, opened 3 years ago, maxed out. A business line of credit with a regional bank, opened 2 years ago, defaulted. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. This was not identity theft by a stranger. A stranger steals your card to buy televisions and sneakers in a different state until the algorithm catches them. This was systematic. This was sustained. This was a parasite feeding on a host over the course of years. I clicked into the transaction history of the American Express card. The charges mocked me. There were flights to Tulum, a 5-star hotel booking in Paris during Fashion Week, a charge for $6,000 at a bridal boutique in Manhattan, the deposit for Sloane's first wedding dress, the one she discarded because she said the lace looked too peasant. There were charges for high-end furniture stores, the same stores where Sloane had bought the beige sectional she had bragged about on Instagram. I remembered that day. She had posted a photo of herself lounging on the sofa with a glass of champagne, captioning it, "Hard work pays off." It wasn't her hard work, it was my credit rating. But the real knife in the gut came when I found the loan documents for the business line of credit. It was labeled under a generic holding name, but the memo line read, Lumina Startup Capital. This was the money that had launched Sloane's failing candle business, the loan that was currently suffocating under late fees and interest. I looked at the guarantor information. Primary guarantor, Isla Marie Simmons. My signature was there. It was a digital signature, the kind you generate with a click. But it was legally binding, and below it, the contact email for the account administrator. I expected to see Sloane's email. Sloane was selfish. Yes, but she was also lazy. It would be just like her to use my name and then route the bills to her own inbox so she could ignore them. But the email address listed for account recovery was not Sloane's. It was Galloway_private, my father. I sat back in my seat, the leather creaking loudly in the quiet car. A car drove past on the highway, its headlights sweeping across my eyes, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the world looked different, sharper, crueler. My father had opened these accounts. My father had used my Social Security number, which he likely had in his old tax files from when I was a dependent, to leverage debt that he could not take out in his own name. He knew his credit was likely overextended to keep up the appearance of the Holloway empire. He knew Sloane had the financial literacy of a toddler, so he used the one resource he had left, the invisible daughter, the one who never asked for anything, so she would never notice if things were taken. I clicked on the profile settings for the credit monitoring site. I needed to see the recovery phone number. There it was. My mother's cell phone number. It was a family affair, a conspiracy of 3. I stared at the screen until the pixels started to blur. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing sense of betrayal that is supposed to bring a daughter to her knees. I waited for the grief of losing the illusion of a loving family. But the tears did not come. Instead, a memory surfaced. It was from 5 years ago. I had been 24, living in a studio apartment with a radiator that hissed and leaked brown water onto the floor. My car had broken down. The transmission had failed. I had called my father, humiliated, asking for a loan of $1,500 to fix it so I could get to work. I remembered his voice on the phone. He had sounded so weary, so burdened. "We are stretched thin right now. Isla," he had said, "the market is tough. We just do not have the liquidity. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It builds character." I had hung up and cried for an hour. Then I had taken the bus for 3 months and eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner to save up the money. 2 weeks after that phone call, Sloane had posted pictures from a spa weekend in Arizona. My mother had commented on the post, "You deserve it, baby girl." I looked back at the American Express statement on my screen. There it was, a charge for the Miraval Resort and Spa, Arizona, dated exactly 2 weeks after my father told me they had no liquidity. They did not have liquidity because they were spending my future to fund her present. I felt a laugh clawing its way up my throat, dry and jagged. They had told me today that 2 years in prison was a small price to pay. They acted as if this was a new request, a sudden emergency. But I had been in prison for years. I was in a financial prison they had built bar by bar, credit check by credit check. They had shackled me to debt I didn't create, ensuring that I would never have the capital to escape their orbit, never have the means to outshine Sloane. They kept me small so she could feel big. I closed the laptop lid, but I did not turn it off. The screen went black, leaving me in the semi-darkness of the parking lot. The neon pink light washed over my hands. My hands were steady. They were not shaking anymore. The tremor I had faked in my father's office was gone. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I did not see a victim. I saw an auditor who had just found the discrepancy that would bring the whole company down. They had made a critical mistake. They thought money was the only form of power. They thought because I didn't have their money, I didn't have power. But they forgot what I did for a living. I traded in the currency of consequences. I traded in proof. If they had just asked me to take the fall for the taxes, I might have considered some version of help. Perhaps finding them a legal loop to minimize the damage. But this was theft. This was cannibalism. They had eaten my identity to feed their vanity. I reached for my phone and dialed a number. It wasn't a lawyer. Not yet. It was the automated line for the credit bureau's fraud department. I listened to the robotic voice listing options. Press 1 to report a lost or stolen card. Press 2 if you believe you are a victim of identity theft. My thumb hovered over the number 2. No, not yet. If I reported it now, the investigation would start. The accounts would be frozen. My parents would be alerted. They would have time to spin a story, to destroy evidence, to claim I was unstable. They would gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. I needed more than a report. I needed leverage. I needed to own them the way they owned me. I hung up the phone. I opened the laptop again. I needed to see the mortgage. If they were leveraging my credit for candles and vacations, what were they doing with the house? The house was their pride, the Holloway estate, the symbol of their status. I navigated to the county clerk's public records database. It was a clunky, outdated website that hadn't been updated since the late 90s. But the data was there if you knew how to query it. I searched for Graham and Diane Holloway. The deed popped up, and there it was. A notice of default from 6 months ago. They had cured it, likely by shuffling money from yet another fraudulent source. But the cracks were there. And more interestingly, there was a pending application for a home equity line of credit, a massive one. They were trying to pull equity out of the house to pay for the wedding. They were going to mortgage the roof over their heads to pay for a party to impress the Caldwells. I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. It was intricate. It was dangerous. It required me to walk back into that house tomorrow and look them in the eye and lie better than they had ever lied to me. They wanted Isla, the daughter. They would get her. They would get the terrified, compliant. I'll do anything to help the family daughter. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would sign their papers. I would take the blame. But first, I was going to change the terms of the deal. They viewed me as an asset? Fine. I would behave like a hostile takeover. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was nearly 10. I had about 20 hours left of my thinking time. I put the car in reverse. The gravel crunched under my tires. A satisfying, gritty sound. I wasn't going to a hotel. I was going to my apartment to print documents. I needed a quitclaim deed. I needed an LLC formation agreement. I needed a stack of paper thick enough to bury them. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I drove past the diner window. I saw a family eating inside. A mother, a father, and 2 daughters. They were laughing, sharing a milkshake. It looked like a scene from a movie I would never be cast in. I turned my eyes back to the road. The road was dark, but my headlights cut a clear, bright path through the night. I didn't need a family anymore. I had a target, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I stepped on the gas. The engine roared, alive and angry, carrying me toward the war, to the Graham and Diane Holloways of the world. I am Isla the Invisible, Isla the Quiet, Isla the girl who processes invoices in a windowless basement for a logistics company. That is the biography they wrote for me. And for years, I let them publish it because it was easier than explaining the truth to people who only listen to the sound of their own voices. But the truth is a very different beast. My real title is Senior Forensic Auditor at Bishop & Rowe Litigation Group. We are not the kind of firm you hire to do your taxes. We are the firm you hire when you suspect your husband is hiding $10 million in cryptocurrency before a divorce, or when a board of directors realizes their CFO has been funneling revenue into a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I do not just add numbers, I interrogate them. I look for the hesitation marks in a ledger, the ghostly footprints of deleted transactions, and the commingling of funds that people think they have scrubbed away. I am a hunter. My rifle is a spreadsheet, and my bullets are subpoenas. Back in my apartment, I did not pace, I did not throw things. I engaged what my colleagues call Isla mode. I stripped off my blazer, tied my hair back so tight it pulled at my temples, and brewed a pot of black coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I set up my 3 monitors on my dining table. My war room. I had the raw data I had pulled from the credit bureaus in the car, but that was just the surface. Now, I needed to see the organs of the beast. Using the credentials I had guessed, My mother used the same password for everything. A combination of Sloane's birthday and the name of her first poodle. I logged into the online banking portal for the business account attached to the startup loan under my name. The screen filled with rows of transactions. To an untrained eye, it looked like a standard operating ledger. To me, it looked like a crime scene. I opened my proprietary auditing software and began to feed the data in. I created a visual flowchart. On the left was the input, the loan disbursement of $150,000, taken out in my name 2 years ago. On the right was the output. I watched the lines connect on the screen, a digital spiderweb of greed. Sloane's business expenses were laughable. There were withdrawals listed as material acquisition that matched the exact price of a vintage Chanel handbag I had seen her carrying last Thanksgiving. There were payments to consultants that traced back to a high-end wedding planner in Italy, a wedding venue she had looked at before settling on a local one. She was stripping the company bone dry, treating a business loan like a personal piggy bank. But then, I saw something that made me stop typing. There was a recurring monthly transfer of $4,000 to an entity called G.H. Consulting Services. I frowned. G.H. Graham Holloway. I clicked deeper. Tracing the routing number of this consulting firm, it wasn't a firm, it was a private checking account at a different bank, one that I knew my father used for his discretionary spending. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the monitors reflecting in my glasses. My father wasn't just covering for Sloane, he was eating from the trough too. I followed the money from GH Consulting. Where did the $4,000 go every month? I cross-referenced the dates with his social media, or rather, the country club's social media. Every time a transfer hit his account, a large payment went out to the Oakhaven Country Club. He was using the loan meant for his daughter's business, the loan secured by his other daughter's credit, to pay his membership dues. He was literally playing golf on my dime. I kept digging. I found payments to a landscaping company that worked exclusively on residential properties. I found invoices for office repairs that coincided perfectly with the renovation of their master bathroom last spring. The picture was complete, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. They hadn't just stolen my identity to help Sloane launch a career. They had stolen my identity to maintain their own lifestyle. The Holloway family facade was being propped up by high-interest debt that was anchored around my neck. I looked at the flowchart. It was a perfect circle of theft. They took the loan in my name. They funneled the cash to themselves. They defaulted on the payments. And now that the creditors were circling and the taxman was knocking, they wanted me to go to prison for the very crime they had committed against me. A surge of adrenaline hit me. It was the same rush I felt when I found the smoking gun in a corporate fraud case, but then the auditor in me took over. Calculating the risk. If I went to the police right now with this spreadsheet, what would happen? I looked at the documents again. My name was on the loan application. My digital signature was on the tax returns. My credit history showed the inquiries. If I walked into a police station today, my father, who had been a respected businessman in this town for 30 years, would spin a narrative. He would say, "Poor Isla. She tried to start this business for her sister, but she got greedy. She mismanaged the funds. We tried to help her. We even took some consulting fees to try and guide her. But she wouldn't listen, and now she's trying to blame us. He had the money, or at least the appearance of it, to hire high-powered defense attorneys. I had a public defender budget, with the paper trail currently existing. They could easily frame me as the mastermind who funneled money to her family to buy their love, and then panicked when the IRS caught on. The prosecutor would see my name as the primary guarantor. They would see me as the CEO on paper. I could not report this yet. Not until I changed the narrative. Not until I had something that proved intent. I needed them to admit it. Or I needed to trap them in a lie so big they couldn't buy their way out of it. I needed to make them destroy themselves. I closed the transaction window and opened a new tab. It was time to assess their liquidity. If I was going to go to war, I needed to know what supplies the enemy had. I ran a comprehensive asset search. This was a gray area legally, something I usually needed a court order for. But tonight, I was not an officer of the court. I was a daughter with a grudge and a brute force password cracker. I pulled their retirement accounts. Empty. My father had cashed out his 401k 3 years ago, taking a massive tax penalty. I pulled their investment portfolio. Sold off. The blue chip stocks were gone, replaced by penny stocks that were worth less than the paper they were printed on. I checked their credit cards. Maxed out. My parents were destitute. They were living on fumes and the illusion of wealth. The reason they needed Sloan to marry Evan Caldwell wasn't just for prestige. It was a bailout. They were banking on the Caldwell connection to bring new business deals. Or perhaps they hoped Evan would be generous with family loans once the knot was tied. They were drowning, and they had been standing on my head to keep their noses above water. I scanned the list of assets again. There had to be something. Graham Holloway would never allow himself to be completely zeroed out. He was too proud. And then I saw it, the one thing that was still holding value. The house. 4,200 Sycamore Drive. It was a sprawling estate. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, a pool, and a carriage house. It was appraised at $2.5 million. I pulled the title history. As I had suspected in the car, they were in the process of trying to refinance, to pull equity out, but the banks were stalling because their income-to-debt ratio was trash. The house was their stage. It was the only thing that made them the Holloways. Without that house, they were just 2 broke con artists in their 60s. They loved that house more than they loved Sloan, and certainly more than they loved me. It was the physical manifestation of their ego. A plan began to crystallize in my mind. It was cold, it was calculating, and it was absolutely perfect. They wanted me to take the fall? They wanted me to sign a confession? Fine, I would play the part. I would be the scared, trembling daughter who would do anything to save the family name. I would offer them a solution, a way to protect the house from the inevitable seizure that would come when I went to prison. I would tell them that if I pleaded guilty to tax fraud and embezzlement, the government would come for restitution. I would tell them the feds would pierce the corporate veil and take the house because the stolen money was used to renovate it. I would tell them the only way to save their precious mansion was to move it out of their name, temporarily, of course, just to keep it safe. I would make them sign the house over to a holding company, my holding company. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I opened a new window and went to the Secretary of State's website. I began the registration process for a new LLC. I needed a name that sounded boring, corporate, and safe. Something Graham Holloway would glance at and assume was standard legal jargon. Black Harbor Holdings, LLC. I paid the expedited filing fee with my own clean credit card. Next, I pulled up a template for a quitclaim deed. This was a document that transferred ownership of a property from one party to another with no warranty. It was fast, it was dirty, and it was exactly what I needed. I filled in the grantors, Graham and Diane Holloway. I filled in the grantee, Black Harbor Holdings, LLC. I stared at the document on the screen. This was it. This was the weapon. If I did this, there was no going back. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was effectively stealing their home. Technically, I was tricking them into giving it to me, but in the eyes of family morality, it was nuclear warfare. I thought about the 2 years in minimum security. I thought about the 500 credit score. I thought about my father playing golf while I ate ramen noodles. I typed in the legal description of the property, copying it carefully from the county assessor's website, Lot 4, Block B, Sycamore Heights. Addition, I needed a notary, a witness, someone who would make it official, someone who would bind them to this mistake forever. But it couldn't be their usual family lawyer. He would read the fine print. He would warn them. I needed a mobile notary, someone who was paid to verify identities and witness signatures, not to give legal advice, someone who wanted to get in, get the stamp on the paper, and get out. I opened a search tab for 24-hour mobile notary services. I found a woman named Megan Price with 5-star reviews. Prompt, professional, discreet, perfect. I picked up my phone and drafted a text to Megan, scheduling her for the following evening at 8 o'clock, 30 minutes after my deadline to return to the house. I printed the documents. The printer hummed rhythmically, spitting out page after page of dense legal text. I organized them into two piles. Pile A, the confession, the fake admission of guilt they wanted me to sign. Pile B, the transfer, the death warrant for their financial future. I stacked them neatly together. I walked to the window of my apartment and looked out at the city skyline. The sun was just starting to crack the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray. I wasn't the prey anymore. I wasn't the spare tire. I was the auditor, and the audit was about to begin. I went to the bathroom and washed my face. I looked in the mirror and practiced my expression. I let my shoulders slump. I widened my eyes. I made my lip tremble. I am so scared. Daddy, I don't want to go to jail. But I'll do it for you. Just we have to protect the house. It was convincing. Even I almost believed it. I walked back to the table, picked up the folder, and slipped it into my bag. Let the show begin. The sun was fully up now, casting long, hard shadows across my living room floor, but I had not moved from my desk. The adrenaline of the night had settled into a cold, rhythmic focus. I had the raw materials of my revenge, the LLC, the deed, the knowledge of their crimes. But a weapon is useless if you do not know how to aim it. I needed to construct a narrative so compelling, so terrifying, that my parents would willingly sign away their kingdom just to save their own skin. I turned my attention back to the county records. I needed to understand the exact pressure point regarding the house. I knew they were trying to refinance, but I needed the specifics. I dug into the pending instruments file, a little-known corner of the database that showed documents submitted but not yet fully recorded. There it was, a uniform residential loan application dated 3 weeks ago. They were attempting a cash-out refinance for $400,000. The application listed the purpose as home improvement, but I knew better. This was the wedding money. This was the Caldwell Merger Fund. Without this loan, the florists, the caterers, and the band for Sloane's wedding would not get paid. The deposit checks would bounce. The scandal would be instantaneous. But here was the kicker. The bank had flagged the file. There was a note in the system code, pending verification of income sources. The bank was suspicious. My father was scrambling. He needed the house to appraise high, and he needed his financial record to look spotless for just 2 more weeks to get the loan approved. This was the lever. If I went to prison, the investigation would freeze their assets. The bank would see a federal fraud case linked to the immediate family and the business they consulted for. The loan would be denied instantly. The wedding would implode. I could use that. I pulled up the document drafting software again. I needed to refine the quitclaim deed. This document is the nuclear option of real estate. Unlike a warranty deed, which guarantees the title is clean, a quitclaim deed simply says, "Whatever interest I have in this property, I am giving it to you right now." It is fast, dirty, and final. I typed in the consideration amount, $10. That is standard legal language for a nominal fee, making the contract binding. I was about to buy a $2.5 million estate for the price of a fast food lunch, but they would never sign a deed giving the house to me. Isla Simmons, they would see through that immediately. That was why Black Harbor Holdings, LLC was so vital. I spent the next hour building the corporate binder for Black Harbor. I created an operating agreement that looked incredibly dense and sophisticated. In the fine print, it designated me, Isla Simmons, as the manager and sole member. But on the signature page, the only page I would let them dwell on, it simply listed me as authorized agent. To my father, agent meant employee. It meant I was just the clerk holding the pen. He would assume he and my mother were the silent beneficial owners. I prepared a secondary, completely toothless document called a trust indenture, which stated that Black Harbor Holdings was holding the property for the protection of the Holloway family interest. It was legal gibberish. It had no binding power because the deed superseded it, but it was the security blanket they needed. It was the lie that would let them sleep at night, until I evicted them. Now, the execution. I needed a witness, A notary is the gatekeeper of truth in the world of paper. If a notary stamps it, it happened. But I couldn't use their country club friend, Mr. Henderson, who had done their taxes for 20 years. Henderson would ask questions. Henderson would say, "Graham, why are you moving the house into an LLC the day before your daughter confesses to a felony?" I needed a stranger. I picked up my phone and found the number I had saved earlier. Megan Price, mobile notary. Her website said she specialized in hospital signings, jails, and urgent real estate transactions. That meant she was used to high-stress environments and didn't ask why people were crying while they signed. I dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Mobile notary. This is Megan." Her voice was crisp, professional, devoid of warmth. Perfect. "Hi, Megan," I said, matching her tone. "My name is Isla. I have a time-sensitive real estate transfer that needs to be notarized this evening. It is an intra-family transfer involving a deed and an affidavit. I need someone at 8 o'clock sharp in the North Hills district. I have an opening at 8, she said, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "Standard travel fee plus per signature. I will need valid government ID for all signers. No expired licenses." "Understood," I said. "And Megan? This is a sensitive situation. My parents are elderly and a bit difficult. We are trying to settle some estate planning matters before a medical procedure. I need this to be strictly by the book. Verify the IDs, witness the signatures, stamp the papers, and that is it. We do not need the documents explained. We just need the execution." "I am not a lawyer, ma'am," Megan replied, her voice flat. "I do not explain documents. I verify identity and volition, if they are willing to sign. I stamp, that is the job." "Perfect," I said. "I will text you the address. Do not ring the doorbell. Just text me when you are in the driveway." I hung up. The trap was set. Now I had to bait it. I spent the rest of the afternoon rehearsing. I wasn't rehearsing lines. I was rehearsing a persona. I had to become the Isla they expected. The Isla who was terrified of prison. The Isla who believed her father was a genius who could fix anything. I showered and washed the audit off me. I put on a simple gray dress that was a few years old. Something that made me look younger. Smaller. I skipped the makeup. I wanted to look pale. I wanted to look like I hadn't slept, which wasn't hard because I hadn't. I sat down at my table and organized the paperwork into 2 distinct stacks. The first stack was the crime. This was the confession letter my father wanted. It stated that I, Isla Simmons, had acted alone in defrauding the government and embezzling funds from Lumina. It was my death sentence. The second stack was the trap, the quitclaim deed, the LLC agreement, the transfer tax forms. I looked at the 2 piles. One represented my destruction. The other represented theirs. I needed a way to bridge the gap. I needed to explain why the house had to move. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and scribbled some notes, creating a fake legal strategy to present to them. Argument 1. Civil asset forfeiture. I would tell them that because I had lived at the house intermittently. A lie, but they wouldn't remember. And because some of the stolen money had been used for consulting fees to Dad. The FBI could claim the house was improved with proceeds of crime. Argument 2. The freeze. I would tell them that the moment I surrendered, the IRS would put a lien on every asset connected to my name. Since my name was on the startup loan that paid my father's consulting fees, the house was tainted. The solution: move the house into a clean, neutral LLC today, before the confession is filed tomorrow. If the house is not in their name when the investigation starts, the bank cannot freeze it, the loan can go through, the wedding is saved. It was a house of cards, logic-wise. A real lawyer would tear it apart in 5 minutes. But my parents weren't lawyers. They were narcissists, and narcissists are easily terrified by the idea of losing their toys. They would be so focused on saving the asset that they wouldn't look at who held the keys to the safe. I checked the clock. 6:30. I packed the laptop. I packed the 2 stacks of paper. I packed the yellow legal pad. I walked around my apartment, turning off the lights one by one. Click, the kitchen went dark. Click, the hallway. Click, the living room. My apartment was modest, clean, and silent. It was the sanctuary I had built with my own honest money, and I was willing to risk it all to burn down the palace they had built with lies. I stood by the door, my hand on the knob. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my own independence one last time. When I walked out this door, I was stepping back into the cage. But this time, I wasn't the animal. I was the zookeeper. I opened the door and walked out into the cool evening air. The drive to the Holloway estate would take 40 minutes. That gave me exactly enough time to stop being Isla the auditor and start being Isla the martyr. The game was on. I pulled my sedan into the driveway at exactly 6:58 in the evening. Punctuality was a virtue my father demanded, even from the daughter he was planning to sacrifice. I sat in the car for 30 seconds, watching the golden light spill from the dining room windows. It looked warm. It looked inviting. It looked like the kind of home where people loved each other. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I did not need to add much. The lack of sleep and the sheer weight of hatred I was carrying had already given me purple circles under my eyes. I rubbed them vigorously with my knuckles until the skin was raw and red. I let my shoulders drop forward, collapsing my posture until I looked 3 inches shorter. I practiced a shallow, shaky breath. Showtime. I walked to the front door and unlocked it with my key. The house smelled of lemon polish and expensive potpourri. I could hear them in the formal dining room. There was no sound of silverware clinking. They were waiting. I walked in. They were seated around the mahogany table like a tribunal. My father, Graham, was at the head, a fresh legal pad in front of him. My mother, Diane, was to his right, clutching a glass of white wine. Sloane was on the left, looking at her phone, likely checking to see if her social status had evaporated yet. They all looked up as I entered. I stayed near the doorway, hugging my purse to my chest like a shield. "Well?" my father asked. His voice was not kind. It was impatient. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I looked at the floor, then at my mother, then finally at him. "I will do it," I whispered. The tension in the room snapped like a cut wire. Diane let out a long, dramatic exhale and slumped back in her chair. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, taking a large gulp of wine. "I knew you would do the right thing. Isla, I told your father. I said Isla is a good girl. She loves her sister." Sloane did not even look up from her phone, but I saw her shoulders relax. It was done. The obstacle was removed. Her wedding was back on track. Graham did not smile. He simply uncapped his fountain pen. "Good," he said. "Brisk and businesslike. We have no time to waste. I have already spoken to the lawyer. We are going to schedule a meeting with the district attorney's office for Thursday. You will go in voluntarily. We will present the narrative that you were overwhelmed and made some bad judgment calls. We will frame it as incompetence rather than malice. It will help with sentencing." He was talking about my incarceration as if he were planning a kitchen renovation. I walked forward slowly and pulled out a chair. I did not sit. I gripped the back of it, my knuckles white. "I have a condition," I stammered. Graham stopped writing. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "A condition?" he repeated. "You are hardly in a position to negotiate. Isla, we are cleaning up your mess, remember?" That was the narrative they had already adopted. In less than 24 hours, the lie had become their truth. "My mess, I know," I said, my voice rising in a pitch of orchestrated panic. "I know, Dad, and I am ready to take the blame. I am. But I looked into this. I spent all night reading about tax fraud cases." I paused, letting my lip tremble. "Dad, if I plead guilty to federal tax evasion and embezzlement, they are going to come for the assets." Graham waved his hand dismissively. "You have no assets. That is why this works. You have a 10-year-old car and a rented apartment. Let them seize your laptop. We will buy you a new one when you get out." "No," I said, shaking my head violently. "Not my assets. The proceeds of the crime." I pulled the first document from my bag. It was the flowchart I had made, but I had simplified it for them. I slid it across the table. The money from the loans, The money I'm supposed to say I stole it did not stay in the company account. I said, pointing at the paper with a shaking finger. It went to pay for the roof repairs here. It went to the pool maintenance. It went to the landscaping. I looked at Diane. Mom, the federal government calls that commingling of illicit funds. If I admit that I stole that money, and they trace it to this house, they can seize the house. It is called civil asset forfeiture. They do not even need a conviction to freeze the property. They just need probable cause. The room went dead silent. I saw the color drain from Graham's face. He knew real estate. He knew the term, but he had been so focused on saving his reputation that he had forgotten about the mechanics of the seizure. That is ridiculous, Graham spat, but his voice lacked its usual thunder. This house is in our name. Not yours. It does not matter, I cried out, channeling every ounce of fake desperation I had. The improvements were paid for with the stolen money. That makes the house a beneficiary of the fraud. Dad, if I go in there on Thursday and confess, the IRS could put a padlock on these doors by Friday. They will take it all, to pay back the debt. Diane made a high, choking sound. Graham, she gasped. Graham, is that true? Can they take the house? Graham stared at the table. He was calculating. He was realizing that the renovation money had come from the Lumina accounts. He had thought he was being clever, using the loan to fix up the estate, but now that cleverness was a noose, it is a possibility, he admitted, his voice tight, a remote one. But if the prosecutor is aggressive, we cannot lose the house, Sloane shrieked, slamming her phone down. The wedding reception is here in 3 weeks. If there is a foreclosure sign on the lawn, I am dead. Evan will leave me. I seized the moment. I have a way to stop it, I said. They all looked at me. For the first time, they were not looking at me with contempt. They were looking at me with fear. What way? Graham asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out the second stack of documents. My hands were shaking, but the papers were crisp and steady. We have to move the house. Tonight, before I turn myself in, I laid the papers out. I set up a holding company. I explained, talking fast, like a terrified girl trying to fix a broken vase. It is called Black Harbor Holdings. It is a blind shell. If we transfer the deed to this company right now, the house is no longer personal property of Graham and Diane Holloway. It belongs to the LLC. Graham grabbed the papers. He scanned them, his eyes darting back and forth. He stopped at the signature page. Isla, he said slowly, why is your name listed as the manager? My heart stopped for a beat. This was the hurdle. This was the moment the trap would either snap shut or break apart. I swallowed hard. Because it cannot be you. Dad, I said, if I confess, they are going to audit you immediately. They are going to look for every asset connected to your Social Security number. If you are the manager of the company holding the house, they will pierce the corporate veil in 5 minutes. I pointed to the paper. But if I am the manager, look, I am already the one going to prison. I am already the criminal. It makes sense that I would try to hide assets. But here's the trick. I leaned in, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The LLC does not own the house for me. I drafted a side agreement, a trust indenture. I pulled out the toothless, meaningless document I had drafted. See? It says Black Harbor Holdings holds the title in trust for the Holloway family. But this document, we do not record this one with the county. We keep this one in your safe. To the outside world, the house belongs to a generic company, but legally, it is still yours. When the 2 years are up and the heat dies down, I sign it back over. Graham read the trust indenture. He saw the words, Holloway Family Interest. He saw the legal padding that made him feel safe. He did not know that a recorded deed always trumps an unrecorded private agreement. He did not know it in a court of law. The deed was the king, and this paper was a napkin. He looked at me. He was suspicious. He was a businessman. After all, why would you do this? He asked. Why go through all this trouble if you are going to jail anyway? I looked him in the eye. I summoned the memory of every time I had wanted him to hug me. Every time I had wanted him to say, "Good job, Isla," I let that pathetic, desperate longing fill my eyes, because I do not want you to lose everything. Dad, I whispered, I am already losing my freedom. I just want to make sure there is a home for me to come back to. Diane reached out and touched Graham's arm. Graham, we have to do it. We cannot risk the Caldwells finding out about a lien. If the house gets frozen, Graham looked at the deed. Then he looked at the walls of the dining room. He looked at the crystal chandelier. He looked at the empire he had built. He was terrified of losing it. And fear makes smart men stupid. He looked at the clock. It is 7:15, he said. The courthouse is closed. We cannot record a deed at night. I exhaled. I called a mobile notary. I said, her name is Megan. She is 20 minutes away. I told her it was an emergency estate planning session. She can notarize the signatures here. I will take the papers to the clerk's office first thing in the morning, right before I go to the DA. Graham hesitated. 1 second, 2 seconds, then he nodded. Fine. I felt a rush of cold air move through my body. It was done. Call her, he ordered. Get her here. And Isla? Yes. Dad? Make sure this paperwork is airtight. I do not want any mistakes. I almost smiled. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Suppressing that smile. It is airtight. Dad, I promise. I pulled out my phone. My fingers did not tremble as I unlocked the screen. I opened my messages and found Megan Price. I typed 2 words. Green light. I put the phone down on the table. Now, we just have to wait. I said softly. Sloane stood up. I'm going to get a drink. This is too stressful. Do I have to sign anything? No, I said. Just Mom and Dad. You are not on the title. Thank God, she muttered, walking toward the liquor cabinet. I sat down in the chair opposite my father. I watched him reread the trust indenture, the fake safety net I had woven for him. He looked up at me, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. You surprised me, Isla, he said. I did not think you had the stomach for corporate maneuvering. I looked back at him, my face a mask of obedient tragedy. I learned from the best. Dad. The doorbell rang exactly 30 minutes later. It was a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet house. That must be her, I said. Standing up, I walked to the hallway. My legs felt light. My head felt clear. As I reached for the doorknob, I paused. Behind me, in the dining room, my parents were sitting at the table, ready to sign away their legacy to the daughter they thought was a fool. They thought they were winning. They thought they were surviving. I opened the door. Megan stood there, looking brisk and efficient in a navy blazer, a notary bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like an executioner dressed for casual Friday. Hi, she said. I am here for the signing. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We are ready for you. I led her into the dining room. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I needed was the click of the lock. Megan Price was a study in beige and navy efficiency. She walked into the dining room of the Holloway estate and did not look at the crystal chandelier, the Persian rug, or the visibly sweating man at the head of the table. She simply set her black leather bag on the polished mahogany, unzipped it, and removed a heavy circular stamp and a logbook bound in vinyl. Please place your government-issued photo identifications on the table, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of interest. It was the voice of a woman who had notarized divorces, deathbed wills, and bankruptcy filings. She had seen humanity at its worst, and she had decided to look at the paperwork instead. My father, Graham, fumbled for his wallet. His hands, usually so steady when gripping a golf club or a Scotch glass, were trembling. He pulled out his driver's license and slid it across the wood. It made a soft scraping sound that seemed deafening in the quiet room. Diane followed suit. She tossed her license down with a flick of her wrist, her face set in a mask of annoyed impatience. To her, this was just another transaction, Another unpleasant task to be delegated and completed, so she could go back to pretending her life was perfect. Megan picked up Graham's license. She looked at the photo, then at his face. She adjusted her glasses. "Graham Holloway?" she asked. "Yes," my father croaked. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing a baritone authority he did not feel. "Yes, that is me." Megan noted the details in her logbook. She pushed the heavy stack of documents, the quitclaim deed, the LLC formation papers, the transfer tax forms, toward him. "Please sign your name exactly as it appears on your identification on the lines marked with the yellow tabs." She instructed, "Do not date them. I will apply the date with my stamp." Graham picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc he had owned for 20 years, a symbol of his status. He hovered the nib over the paper. The ink was black, permanent. "Isla," he said, his eyes not leaving the paper. "You are sure about the trust agreement? You are sure this keeps the house safe?" I stood behind his chair, my hands clasped in front of me in a pose of penitence. I watched the tip of the pen. It was vibrating slightly. "I am sure." "Dad," I said softly, "the lawyer said it is the only way to insulate the property from the federal investigation. Once it is in Black Harbor Holdings, it is a separate entity. They cannot touch it." He took a breath. He looked at the walls of the room. He looked at the crown molding he had paid a fortune to install. He was not just signing a house. He was signing away his identity. But fear is a powerful motivator. The fear of the padlock on the door. The fear of the neighbors seeing the foreclosure notice. He pressed the pen to the paper. Graham P. Holloway. The signature was jagged. But it was there. He signed the second page, then the third. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a physical weight lifting off my chest, transferring onto his. He was handing me the keys to his kingdom. And he was thanking me for taking them. "Diane," Megan said, sliding the papers to the right. My mother did not hesitate. She picked up the pen as if she were signing for a UPS package. She did not care about the mechanics of ownership. She only cared about the appearance of stability. If moving the house meant saving the wedding, she would have signed it over to the devil himself. She scrawled her name with a flourish. "Diane Holloway. Thank you." "Mom," I whispered, "I am so sorry for all of this." Diane didn't look at me. She just pushed the papers back toward the notary. "Just fix it. Isla, that is all I ask." Megan began the process of stamping. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of the embosser hitting the paper was rhythmic and heavy, like dirt hitting a coffin. And then, the doorbell rang again. The sound tore through the room like a gunshot. Sloane dropped her wine glass. It didn't break, but wine sloshed over the rim and stained the white tablecloth red. "Who is that?" Graham demanded, his head snapping up. "Were we expecting anyone?" "No," I said, my mind racing. I told everyone to stay away. I looked at Megan. She had stopped stamping, her hand hovering in midair. She looked annoyed at the interruption. "I will get it," I said. "Hide the papers." I did not wait for them to react. I turned and walked quickly to the foyer. I needed to intercept whoever was at the door before they walked into the middle of a property transfer that was supposed to be a secret. I reached the front door and looked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was Evan Caldwell, Sloane's fiancé, the golden boy, the future district attorney. He was standing on the porch, wearing a cashmere coat and a look of grim determination. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at a fundraiser in the city. I opened the door just a crack. "Evan," I said, feigning surprise, "what are you doing here? Sloane is not... She is not really up for visitors." Evan did not wait for an invitation. He pushed the door open with a firm, authoritative hand and stepped into the foyer. He brought the smell of cold rain and expensive cologne with him. "I am not here for a social call." "Ela," he said. His voice was tight. "I have been hearing things. My father's friends at the bank there are rumors circulating about liquidity issues, about a blocked refinance application." He looked past me, toward the dining room where the light was spilling out, and then he saw Megan's notary bag sitting on the hall table, which she had left there when she entered. It was a distinct, Utilitarian black bag with a seal on the side. Evan's eyes narrowed. "Why is there a notary here at 8 o'clock at night?" he asked. He walked past me. I tried to grab his arm, but he was too fast. He strode into the dining room. The scene froze. Graham was pale, his hands hovering over the documents. Diane looked like a deer caught in headlights. Megan was holding the stamp. Looking bored, Evan walked right up to the table. He looked down at the paperwork. Quitclaim deed. Grantor. Graham and Diane Holloway. Grantee. Black Harbor Holdings. LLC. Evan looked up, his face flushing with anger. "What is this?" he demanded. "You are dumping the house? 2 weeks before the wedding?" Sloan burst into tears. "Evan, please. It is not what it looks like. It looks like asset protection." Evan snapped. "It looks like you are insolvent and trying to hide the equity before a bankruptcy filing. Do you have any idea what this does to me? To my campaign? If the press finds out I married into a family that is laundering assets in the middle of the night," Graham stood up. "Now, hold on, son. This is just a restructuring. It is fraud," Evan yelled. "Stop," I shouted. My voice was loud enough to cut through the noise. I walked into the center of the room. I needed to pivot. I needed to take the grenade and jump on it. "It is not fraud. Evan," I said, my voice shaking with a perfect mix of shame and defiance. "It is protection." "Protection from what?" he asked, turning his glare on me. "From me," I said. The room went silent. Evan looked at me, confused. "From you?" "Yes," I said. I lowered my head. "I made some mistakes. With the company, with Lumina, there is going to be an investigation, a federal one." Evan stared at me. "You? But you are the quiet one. You are the admin assistant." "I know," I said, "but I was helping Sloan with the books, and I messed up. Badly. The money is gone. Evan, and because my name is on the accounts, and because I used some of the funds to pay for repairs on this house, the lawyers think the government might try to seize the property." I looked at my parents. They were watching me, breathless, letting me weave the lie that saved them. "This transfer?" I gestured to the papers. "It is not to hide money from creditors. It is to protect Sloan's inheritance from my crimes. If the house is in an LLC, the feds cannot take it to pay for my mistakes. We are doing this to ensure that when you marry Sloan, she brings assets to the marriage, not a foreclosure lawsuit." Evan looked at the papers again. He was a lawyer. He understood the logic. If the house was tainted by illicit funds, it was vulnerable. Moving it was a gray area. But in the face of a forfeiture, it was a defensive move. He looked at Sloan. "Is this true?" Sloan nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, Evan, Isla. Isla ruined everything. We are just trying to fix it so the wedding isn't affected." Evan let out a long breath. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Jesus, Isla," he said. "I thought you were the responsible one." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "I am trying to fix it. Evan, that is why the notary is here. We are moving the house to a holding company where I am the manager, so I can take full responsibility for it. Mom and Dad are just victims in this." Evan looked at the deed. He saw my name listed as the manager of Black Harbor Holdings. "Okay," he said, his voice lowering. "Okay, if this is a containment strategy, I get it, but you have to understand my position. I cannot be blindsided like this." I walked over to the table. I picked up a document from the bottom of my stack. It was a generic acknowledgement of transaction form I had printed. Just in case. It was meaningless legally, but it looked official. "I know," I said, "and we don't want you to be blindsided. In fact, the lawyer suggested that since you are marrying into the family in 2 weeks, and this affects the potential marital estate, you should acknowledge that you are aware of the structure." I held the paper out to him. "What is this?" he asked. "It is just a waiver." I lied smoothly. "It says you are aware that the property at 4200 Sycamore Drive is being transferred to Black Harbor Holdings and that you have no objection. It protects you. Evan, if the feds come asking later, you can say you were not part of the decision. You just acknowledged that the family was handling their own estate planning. It proves you were not a conspirator, just an observer." Evan read the paper. It was short. It used words like knowledge and spousal interest. It appealed to his lawyer brain. He thought he was signing a document that distanced him from the liability. In reality, he was signing a document that proved he was in the room while a fraudulent conveyance took place. If I ever needed to burn the Caldwells down, this piece of paper was the match. "Give me a pen," he said. I handed him the Mont Blanc. He signed his name, Evan Caldwell, witnessed. Megan said. She stamped the acknowledgement. I took the paper back and slid it into my folder. My heart was hammering so hard I thought they could hear it. I had them all. I had the house. I had the parents. And now, I had the golden boy. Megan finished the last stamp on the deed. She closed her logbook. "That concludes the signing," she said. She stood up and began packing her bag. The sound of the zipper closing was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "I will take these to the county clerk tomorrow morning," I said. Gathering the original documents, Evan looked at me. "Make sure you do. Isla, and then get yourself a criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one." "I will." "Evan," I said, "thank you for being so understanding." Megan looked at me. "I am done here?" "Yes," I said. "I will walk you out." I led Megan to the door. The air in the hallway felt lighter, thinner. We stepped out onto the porch. The night was dark, the sky covered in clouds. Megan turned to me. She didn't smile, but she gave me a look that was almost searching. "You have a very intense family," she said. "You have no idea," I replied. She handed me the invoice. I paid her in cash, counting out the bills under the porch light. "Drive safe." "Megan," I said. She walked to her car, a sensible sedan that looked a lot like mine. I watched her taillights fade down the driveway. I stood there for a moment in the cold. I looked down at the folder in my hands. Inside was the deed to the Holloway estate. It was mine. They had signed it. They had witnessed it. They had thanked me for taking it. I turned back to the door. I had to go back in there and finish the performance. I had to play the tragic daughter for a few more hours. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from a contact I had at a real estate title company. I had asked him to check the county recording queue earlier that day. "Isla, heads up. The county changed their formatting requirements last week. If the legal description on the deed doesn't include the new parcel ID format, they will reject it at the counter. Make sure you have the updated map reference." I froze. I opened the folder and looked at the deed. I had used the legal description from the old tax assessment. It did not have the new parcel ID. If I tried to record this tomorrow, the clerk would hand it back to me. And if I had to ask my parents to sign again, the spell would break. They would have time to think. They would talk to their lawyer. The trap was locked, but the key was jammed in the hole. I stared at the paper. I was one line of text away from victory, or one line of text away from total ruin. I took a deep breath, shoved the phone back in my pocket, and opened the door. One problem at a time. Tonight, I owned the room. Tomorrow, I had to hack the county. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the cool night air and the retreating taillights of Megan's car. I stood in the foyer for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. It was a thick, suffocating silence, the kind that usually follows a gunshot. I had the deed in my hand. I had the power. But I also had the terrifying knowledge burning a hole in my pocket. The text message about the formatting error that could render my victory void before the sun came up. I pushed that fear down into the pit of my stomach. I could not let it show. Not now. I had one last scene to play before I could retreat to my war room. I walked back into the dining room. The transformation was instantaneous. The moment the witnesses were gone, Megan and Evan, who had left moments before her with a curt nod to my father, the performance of the grieving, supportive family evaporated. My father, Graham, was pouring himself a drink, not a celebratory glass of wine, but a stiff measure of scotch. He didn't look at me. He looked at the glass, swirling the amber liquid with a look of profound satisfaction. "Well," he said, taking a long sip. That was close. Too close. But handled. He set the glass down and finally turned his eyes to me. There was no gratitude in them. There was no fatherly warmth. There was only the cold, appraising look of a man who had finally found a use for a broken tool. You know, Isla, he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. I used to wonder why you were so plain, so unremarkable. Sloane has the fire. She has the charm. You were always just there, taking up space. But tonight, he chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Tonight, you finally justified the cost of raising you. You were useful. I stood by the archway, clutching the folder to my chest. I did not speak. I wanted them to fill the silence. I wanted them to give me everything I needed to hate them without remorse. Diane was already moving around the table, gathering the wine glasses. She looked energized, as if the near-death experience of losing the house had given her a shot of adrenaline. It is the natural order of things, she said breezily, as if discussing the weather. She stopped and looked at Sloane, who was still sitting at the table, looking pale and shaken. Look at your sister. Isla, Diane said, gesturing to Sloane with a linen napkin. Look at her. She is a flower. Rare, delicate, beautiful. Flowers need sun. They need water. They need to be admired. She walked over to me, stopping just inches from my face. She smelled of expensive perfume and rot. And you? Diane continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to be comforting but felt like a scalpel. You are the soil. Isla. You are the dirt. The dirt does not get to bloom. The dirt's only job is to bury itself so the flower has something to stand on. That is what you did tonight. You buried yourself, and because of that, Sloane gets to be beautiful for the Caldwells. She patted my cheek. It was a soft, patronizing pat. Do not be sad about it, she added. Dirt is essential. It is just dirty. That is why we keep it outside. But you served your purpose. 2 years in prison will wash off. Sloane's reputation wouldn't. Sloane looked up, her eyes wide. She didn't defend me. She didn't say, Mom, that is horrible. She just nodded, accepting the metaphor because it placed her exactly where she thought she belonged, at the center of the universe. I am just glad Evan signed that waiver, Sloane said, her voice trembling. If he had walked out. God. Isla, you almost ruined it with that notary coming so late. Why were you so stupid to schedule it when he might be here? I looked at them, the father who saw me as a sunk cost, the mother who saw me as fertilizer, the sister who saw me as an inconvenience. I let the folder drop to my side. I straightened my spine. I let the scared daughter posture fall away like a heavy coat I no longer needed to wear. I am not going. I said. The room was quiet. Graham paused with his glass halfway to his mouth. What did you say? He asked. I looked him dead in the eye. I said I'm not going. I am not going to the district attorney's office on Thursday. I am not going to prison. And I am certainly not going to be the dirt for your flower. Graham laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Don't be dramatic. Isla, the adrenaline is wearing off, and you are getting cold feet. We have a deal. You signed the papers. We have the plan. You are going. No, I said, my voice steady and cool. I am not. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and held it up. The voice recording app was open. The timer was running. It had been running for 45 minutes. I recorded it. Dad, I said. Graham froze. What? I recorded everything. I continued. I recorded you admitting that the tax fraud was yours. I recorded Mom saying I had to take the blame to save the wedding. I recorded the conversation about the commingling of funds. And I just recorded this little speech about how I am the dirt and Sloane is the flower. I took a step forward. It is all here, in the cloud, automatically uploaded. Even if you smash this phone right now, the file is already on 3 different servers. Diane dropped the napkin. Her face went white. Isla, what are you doing? She hissed. I am rewriting the ending. I said. I walked over to the table and placed the folder down. I opened it and pointed to the quitclaim deed they had just signed. You think this was to save the house from the government? I asked. It wasn't. The government was never going to seize this house based on a rumor. Dad, that was a lie. I made it up. Graham's face turned a violent shade of red. You lied? I am a forensic auditor, I said, allowing a sharp edge of pride to enter my voice. I know how asset forfeiture works. They need a conviction and a direct trace. But you didn't know that. You were too scared. So you signed this. I tapped the paper. Grantee, Black Harbor Holdings, LLC, Manager, Isla Simmons. This house does not belong to you anymore. I said, it belongs to me. And that trust indenture you think protects you? The one that says I am holding it for the family? I smiled. A cold, mirthless smile. I never notarized it. Megan didn't stamp that one. Did she? I pulled it out of the stack before she got there. It is just a piece of paper. It has no legal standing against a recorded deed. Graham made a sound like a wounded animal. He lunged across the table, his hand grabbing for the folder. You little bitch, he screamed. Give me that. I snatched the folder back before he could touch it. I didn't flinch. Careful, Graham, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. Careful. If you touch me. I press send. I send this recording to the IRS. I send it to the district attorney, and I send it to Evan Caldwell. Graham stopped. He was panting, his chest heaving. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see the spare tire. He saw the car crash coming straight for him. You wouldn't, he snarled. You would destroy yourself. You are on that loan too. I am. I agreed. But if I turn state's witness, if I hand them the head of the snake, I get immunity, or I get probation. You, on the other hand, you and Mom go away for 10 years. And Sloan? I looked at my sister. She was paralyzed with shock. Sloan loses Evan. She loses the money. She loses the house. She loses everything. Diane began to cry, not the fake tears she used to manipulate me, but real, ugly tears of terror. Isla, please, she sobbed. We are your family. How can you do this? We gave you life. And tonight you tried to take it away. I shot back. You told me 2 years in a cage was a fair price for your comfort. You told me I was dirt. Well, guess what? Dirt owns the ground you are standing on. I looked around the room. This is my house now. Black Harbor Holdings is the owner of record. I am the landlord. You are the tenants. I am evicting you? Graham shouted. I will sue you. I will drag you to court and prove you tricked us. Go ahead. I challenged. File a lawsuit. Tell a judge that you only signed the house over to your daughter because you were trying to hide assets from a federal investigation into your own tax fraud. Please, Dad, put that in a sworn affidavit. See how fast the handcuffs come out. Graham opened his mouth, but no words came out. He realized the trap. He couldn't sue me without confessing to the crime he was trying to hide. I had him in a checkmate position that was so tight he couldn't even twitch. Sloan stood up, her face streaked with mascara. Isla, stop it, she screamed. You are jealous. That is all this is. You have always been jealous because I am the one people want, and you are the one they tolerate. You can't take the house. Where will we live? What about the wedding? The wedding is not my problem, I said calmly. I looked at my watch. I am leaving now. I am going to record this deed first thing in the morning. Once the stamp is on it, the title is transferred. I looked at my parents. I will give you 30 days. That is the standard eviction notice. You have 30 days to find a new place. I suggest a condo, something affordable, because once I start auditing the rest of the accounts properly, I have a feeling you are going to be on a very tight budget. Get out, Graham whispered. His voice was shaking with a rage so pure it felt like heat radiating across the room. Get out of my house. My house, I corrected. I turned and walked toward the door. My legs were trembling now, the adrenaline dump leaving me feeling hollow and lightheaded. I could hear Diane sobbing, a low, keening wail. I could hear Graham throwing his scotch glass against the wall, the shatter of crystal echoing through the hallway. I didn't stop. I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. The night air hit my face like a slap. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the pavement. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there in the dark. I had done it. I had looked the monsters in the eye and I hadn't blinked. I had stripped them of their power. I had taken their castle. I let out a long, shaky breath. A laugh bubbled up, hysterical and jagged. I won. I whispered to the steering wheel. I actually won. But then, the vibration in my pocket returned. The phantom buzz I had been ignoring for the last 20 minutes. I pulled out my phone. I opened the text message from my contact at the title company. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. Isla. Serious heads up. County recorder just issued a memo at 5 o'clock. New formatting requirement for the legal description of property. They need the new parcel identification number, PIN, format included in the preamble. Any deed without it gets rejected at the counter. No exceptions. They are cracking down on administrative errors. I turned on the overhead light in the car. I opened the folder. I looked at the deed Graham and Diane had just signed. Legal description. Lot 4, Block B, Sycamore Heights Edition. It was the old format. It did not have the new PIN number. My blood ran cold. The deed was defective. If I took this to the clerk's office tomorrow morning, the lady behind the glass would look at it, shake her head, and slide it back to me. She would say, "I am sorry. Honey, you need to add the PIN and have the grantors initial the change." The grantors, Graham and Diane. I couldn't go back in there. I couldn't ask them to initial a correction. The bridge was burned. The war was declared. If they knew the deed was worthless, they would never sign a new one. They would realize I had fired a gun with no bullets. They would destroy the document. They would call the police. They would realize I had nothing but a recording of a conversation that might be inadmissible in court without the leverage of the property. I stared at the paper. The ink of my father's signature was still fresh. It looked so official, so final, and yet, it was useless because of a bureaucratic technicality I had missed because I was too busy planning my dramatic exit. I turned off the overhead light. Darkness swallowed the car again. I looked at the house. The lights were still on. I could see the silhouette of my father pacing in the window. He didn't know yet. He thought he had lost. But I knew. I had 30 days to evict them? No. I had about 12 hours to figure out how to fix a legal document without committing a felony that would actually send me to prison. If I forged their initials, and they contested it, a forensic document examiner would prove it in a heartbeat. I would be the one going to jail for fraud, and they would be the victims. I put the car in gear. My hands were slippery on the wheel. I hadn't won. I had just started a race against a clock I didn't know was ticking. I drove away from the house, the taste of victory turning into the bitter ash of panic in my mouth. I needed a new plan, and I needed it before the county clerk's office opened at 8 o'clock in the morning. I did not sleep. Sleep is for people who have clear titles and clean consciences, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I had neither. I sat in my apartment, staring at the defective deed under the harsh light of my desk lamp. The missing parcel identification number taunted me. It was a string of digits, a bureaucratic fingerprint, but without it. The paper was just wood pulp and ink. I knew the procedure. If I altered the document after it had been notarized, even just to add a number, it technically invalidated the notarization. A strict interpretation of the law required the signers to be present for any material changes. But I also knew that county clerks were not forensic scientists. They looked for completeness, not chronology. I had a choice. I could forge their initials next to the addition, which was a felony, or I could find a loophole. I went to the county assessor's website and pulled the full legal abstract of the property. I found the new PIN format. I carefully typed it onto a clear adhesive label, using a font that matched the original document perfectly. Courier New, size 10. I did not stick it on the deed yet. That was too risky. Instead, I drafted a separate document, a Scrivener's affidavit. This is a legal tool used to correct minor clerical errors in recorded documents. It allows a preparer, me, to swear under oath that a mistake was made in drafting and to provide the correct information. It does not require the original grantors to re-sign. Only the person who made the mistake. It was a gamble. Some counties accepted it attached to the unrecorded deed. Others demanded the deed be perfect on its face. I needed insurance. I called Megan Price at 5:30 in the morning. She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with sleep, but alert. Mobile Notary, Megan. It is Isla Simmons. I am sorry to call so early. We have a problem with the legal description on the deed you notarized last night. The county requires a scrivener's affidavit to be attached to clarify the parcel ID. Okay, she said, stifling a yawn. Do you need me to notarize your signature on the affidavit? Yes, I said, and I need it done before 8 o'clock. I will pay triple your emergency rate. I can meet you at the coffee shop on 4th and Main in 45 minutes, she said. Bring cash. I showered in 3 minutes. Cold water only. I dressed in my auditor armor, a sharp black blazer, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked with authority. I grabbed the deed, the new affidavit, and my laptop. I met Megan as the sun was bleeding a pale, sickly yellow into the sky. The coffee shop was empty except for a barista who looked like he hated the morning as much as I loved it. Megan looked at the affidavit. She checked my ID. She watched me sign it. She stamped it. That will be $300, she said. I handed her the envelope. Thank you. Megan, you have no idea what this means. I don't need to know, she said, pocketing the cash. Good luck with your family. Isla. I drove to the county recorder's office and stood outside the glass doors 10 minutes before they unlocked. I was first in line. When the doors opened, I walked straight to the counter. The clerk was a woman named Barbara. I knew her name because I had been sending runners to this office for 5 years. She was formidable, a gatekeeper of public records who could reject a filing because the margins were 1/16 of an inch too narrow. Good morning, Barbara, I said, sliding the stack of papers under the glass partition, recording a quitclaim deed with an attached scrivener's affidavit for the legal description. Barbara adjusted her glasses on a chain. She picked up the papers. She scrutinized the deed. She looked at the signature of Graham Holloway. She looked at the affidavit. She looked at the PIN number I had referenced. She frowned. Usually, we like the PIN to be on the face of the deed. She said, My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady and deferential. But given the urgency of the transfer, it is part of a time-sensitive estate restructuring. My attorney advised that the affidavit was the most efficient way to cure the omission without disturbing the grantors, who are indisposed. Barbara looked at me. She looked at the clock. It was 8:05. She had a line forming behind me. She sighed and reached for her stamp. All right, honey. It meets the statutory requirements. That will be $45 for the first page, $10 for each additional. I handed her my credit card. I watched her hand move. Ka-chunk. The sound was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. Recorded. Book 4502, page 112. Grantee. Black Harbor Holdings, LLC. She handed me the receipt and the yellow copy. You are all set, she said. Thank you. Barbara, I whispered, you have a wonderful day. I walked out of the building and into the bright morning sunlight. I leaned against a concrete pillar and took a photo of the recorded document with my phone. I sent it to my cloud storage. I sent it to my encrypted email. I sent it to a burner email account I kept for emergencies. It was done. The house was mine. The law didn't care about the drama in the dining room last night. The law cared about the stamp in Book 4502. But the house was just the shield. Now I needed the sword. I went back to my car, which I had parked in a garage 2 blocks away. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to the office today. I had called in sick. I had a fever to burn everything down. I logged into the credit reporting agencies. Now that I had the house secured, I didn't need to play nice with the credit score. I initiated a fraud alert on my Social Security number. Then, I filed formal disputes for every single account I hadn't opened. Chase Sapphire, Dispute, fraudulent account/identity theft. American Express. Dispute, fraudulent account/identity theft. Business line of credit. Dispute, fraudulent account/identity theft. By clicking Submit, I was triggering a nuclear winter for my credit report, but I was also triggering an investigation that would lead straight to the IP addresses and physical addresses used to open those accounts. My parents' house, my parents' computer. Then, I saw it. A transaction I had missed the night before because I was so focused on the big loans. On the statement for the Lumina credit card, the one standing in my name, there was a pending charge from 3 days ago. Elite Events Design, $15,000. $15,000. I clicked on the transaction details. It was a deposit. I pulled up a new tab and searched for Elite Events Design. It was the wedding planner Sloan was using, the high-end firm that promised fairy tale endings. Sloan had put the final deposit for her wedding reception on a credit card that was in my name, without my permission, 3 days before they asked me to go to prison for them. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost artistic. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Sloan. I called the number on the wedding planner's website. Elite Events. This is Jessica. Hi. Jessica, I said, using my auditor voice, crisp, professional, and slightly bored. My name is Isla Simmons. I am calling regarding the Holloway Caldwell wedding. I am seeing a charge on my credit card for $15,000, and I just needed to verify some details for my records. Oh, yes. Ms. Simmons, Jessica chirped. We received that payment on Monday. We are so excited for Sloan. The flower wall is going to be spectacular. I bet it is. I said, Jessica, could you do me a favor? Could you email me a copy of the contract that charge is attached to? My accountant is being a stickler for documentation. Of course. I have it right here. I will forward it to the email on file. Wait, I said, which email is that? Sloan Holloway. 88, I said, that is my sister's email. Could you send it to my work email instead? It is, I gave her my email address. Sent, she said cheerfully. Is there anything else? Just one thing. I said, what is the cancellation policy on that contract? Cancellation? Her voice faltered. Well, at this stage, 2 weeks out, the deposit is non-refundable. But surely... Oh, just checking the fine print. I interrupted. Standard procedure. Thanks. Jessica. I hung up. The email arrived 10 seconds later. I opened the PDF. There it was. The contract for the wedding reception. Total cost, $80,000. Paid to date, $65,000. Balance due, $15,000. The signature at the bottom was Sloan Holloway, but the credit card authorization form attached to the back, it listed Isla Simmons as the cardholder. And the signature? It was a clumsy scrawl that looked nothing like mine. It looked like Sloan trying to write with her left hand. Forgery. Sloan had forged my signature to pay for her flower wall. I sat back in my car seat. I had the house. I had the credit fraud reports. And now, I had proof that the bride-to-be was a felon. I organized the files on my laptop. Exhibit A, the recorded deed, house is mine. Exhibit B, the fraud disputes, financial lines are cut. Exhibit C, the wedding contract and forged authorization. The bride is a thief. Exhibit D, the startup loan tracing back to Dad's country club dues. I compiled them into a single, encrypted PDF. I named the file the _truth PDF. Then I drove to a FedEx office. I bought a large, rigid envelope. I printed the documents on high-quality paper. I wanted them to feel heavy. I wrote the address on the front of the envelope in block letters. Mr. Evan Caldwell, Caldwell Associates Law Firm, personal and confidential. I did not write a letter. I did not write a sob story about how my family mistreated me. I did not threaten him. I took a sticky note and wrote a single sentence with a black Sharpie. Before you let them attach my name to yours. Read this. I stuck the note to the front of the packet. I sealed the envelope. It felt like I was sealing a bomb. I walked to the counter. Overnight delivery. Please. I told the clerk. Morning arrival. He weighed the package. "That will be $28. I tapped my card. My own card. The one with the 500 credit score that I was about to rebuild from the ashes. I watched him toss the envelope into the bin behind him. I walked out of the store. I had done it. I had pulled the trigger. By tomorrow morning, Evan Caldwell would know exactly who he was marrying. He would know that his future father-in-law was a fraud, his future mother-in-law was a conspirator, and his bride was a forger. And he would know that the quiet, dirty sister he had looked down on last night was the only person in the family who owned a house and told the truth. I got back in my car. I checked my phone. There were 12 missed calls from my mother, 5 from my father. I ignored them all. Let them panic. Let them think I was just sulking. Let them think they still had time to bully me into submission. They didn't know that the missile was already in the air. The notification on my phone screen was simple. Just a standard automated alert from FedEx, but it hit me with the force of a gavel striking a sounding block. Package delivered to front desk, signed by R. Hernandez. Time, 9:15 in the morning. The bomb was in the building. I sat in my car, parked 3 streets away from the office building where Evan Caldwell worked. I had called in sick to my own job, feigning a migraine that was only half a lie. The pounding in my temples was real, but it was not from pain. It was from the seismic pressure of waiting for the ground to crack open. I did not have to wait long. At 9:42, my phone began to vibrate. It was not Evan. It was Sloan. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up with her name. Over and over again. Sloan calling. Sloan calling. Sloan calling. She called 4 times in a row. Then came the text messages. Pick up the phone. What did you send him? Isla, answer me right now. Evan is freaking out. I took a sip of the lukewarm coffee I had bought an hour ago. I let them sweat. In an audit, silence is often the loudest question you can ask. It forces the other side to fill the void with their own guilt. At 10 o'clock, my father called. I let that go to voicemail too. Then my mother. Finally, at 10:15, I answered Sloan. Isla, she screamed the moment the connection opened. Her voice was shrill, teetering on the edge of hysteria. What did you do? Evan just called me from his office. He is shaking. He said you sent him a file. He asked me about a $15,000 charge to Elite Events. I kept my voice low and steady, the contrast to her panic intentional. Hello, Sloan, I said. I assume Evan received the documentation regarding the identity theft? Identity theft? She shrieked. You told him I stole your identity? I didn't steal anything. We are family. I just borrowed the card because my limit was maxed out and the deposit was due. Mom said it was fine. Did Mom sign my name? I asked. There was a pause, a ragged breath on the other end. What? The authorization form. Sloan. The one you sent to the wedding planner. Did Mom forge my signature? Or did you? Sloan sputtered. I just traced it off an old birthday card. It is not a big deal. I was going to pay you back after the wedding gifts came in. It is a felony. Sloan. I said, it is called forgery. And since the amount is over $10,000, it is a significant felony. I sent Evan the proof because I am not going to let you drag my credit score down into the gutter along with the rest of this family's reputation. You ruined everything, she sobbed. Evan is asking if I knew about the house transfer too. He is asking if Dad is broke. He is saying he needs to reevaluate the liability exposure of this marriage. He is talking like a lawyer. Isla, not a fiancé? He is a lawyer, I reminded her, and he is realizing that he is about to marry into a criminal enterprise. Sloane's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. I hate you. I hope you die. Dad is going to kill you. He is calling the police. Let him. I said. I hung up. The second wave hit 10 minutes later. My father, Graham, finally stopped calling and sent a text. I am calling the police. You stole my house. You defrauded us. I will have you arrested for elder abuse and grand larceny by noon if you do not sign that deed back over. I typed a reply. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the precision of a pianist. Go ahead. Call them. I have the recording of you admitting to the tax fraud. I have the bank records showing you used the Lumina loan for your country club dues. And I have the deed recorded this morning in Book 4502. The house is mine. If you call the police, I will show them everything, and then I will evict you immediately instead of giving you 30 days. The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. He was bluffing. We both knew it. If he brought the law into this, he was signing his own indictment. But the chaos was not contained to texts. Evan was pulling on the thread, and the sweater was unraveling. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I did not recognize, a local area code. Isla Simmons speaking. Isla, it is Evan. His voice was cold. It lacked the familial warmth he had tried to fake the night before. It was the voice of a man who realized he had stepped in something foul and was trying to wipe his shoe. Evan, I said, I assume you got my package. I did. He said, I am looking at it right now. I am looking at a credit card authorization form with a signature that matches the one on the waiver you had me sign last night, but does not match the one on your driver's license. I stayed silent. Isla, he continued, is this real? Did your sister forge your signature to pay for our reception? I took a breath. Yes, Evan, she did. And she did it because her own accounts are overdrawn. And the reason my parents transferred the house to me last night was not to protect it from my crimes. It was to hide it from theirs. Evan swore softly. A sharp, succinct curse word. They told me you were the liability, he said. They told me you were in trouble with the IRS. It was a lie. I said, a narrative they constructed to get me to take the fall for their embezzlement. I refused. That is why I took the house. It is the only leverage I have to ensure they do not frame me. You trapped me, he said, his voice rising slightly. You made me sign that waiver. You made me a witness to a fraudulent conveyance. I did. I admitted. And I'm sorry for that. Evan, but I needed insurance. I needed you to know the truth before you stood at that altar. You can walk away. Evan, you are not married yet. You can cancel the wedding. You can distance yourself. But my family? They are drowning. Do not let them pull you down. There was a long silence on the line. I need to think, he said. Do not contact me again. The line went dead. I leaned back in my seat. The first phase was complete. The wedding was fractured. The trust was gone. Now, the family would turn on each other. I drove to a small coffee shop in the financial district to meet Marcus. Marcus was a friend from law school who had gone into criminal defense while I went into auditing. He was expensive, cynical, and brilliant. I had texted him at dawn, begging for 30 minutes of his time. I slid into the booth opposite him. He was already eating a bagel. You look like hell. Isla, he said, chewing. I feel like $1,000,000, I replied. Or at least, I own a property worth $2.5 million. I laid the situation out for him. The deed, the recording, the blackmail recordings, the forgery, the text messages. Marcus listened, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher. So, let me get this straight, he said, wiping crumbs from his mouth. You stole their house to stop them from framing you for tax fraud, and now you are blackmailing them into silence? I prefer the term aggressive negotiation, I said. Marcus laughed. Okay, here's the problem. The deed is recorded. Yes, that is possession. But possession is 9/10 of the law, not 10/10. They can sue you. They can claim duress. They can claim you tricked them, which you did. And even if you win, you will be tied up in litigation for 5 years. And the recording? In this state, it is admissible. But a jury might see it as entrapment. What do I need? I asked. You need a clean kill. Marcus said, you need a document, signed by them, in front of witnesses, that explicitly states they transferred the house voluntarily and that they release you from all liability. You need a settlement and release agreement. He pulled a napkin and started sketching a structure. You need to offer them a way out. Isla, right now, they are cornered rats. Rats bite. You need to open a door. Tell them if they sign this agreement. You won't go to the police about the tax fraud or the forgery. You will keep their secrets. In exchange, they confirm the house is yours, and they agree to vacate a trade. I said, exactly. Silence for property. But you need to word it carefully. The agreement cannot say, I will not report a crime, because that is technically extortion. It has to say, we are settling all family disputes and financial claims. He looked at me. And you need to do it today, before they find a lawyer who tells them to fight. I nodded. I paid for his bagel. I went back to my car and opened my laptop. I drafted the document Marcus had described. I called it a family settlement and asset restructuring agreement. It sounded boring. It sounded safe. But the clauses inside were ironclad. Clause 1. Graham and Diane Holloway acknowledged that the transfer of 4,200 Sycamore Drive was voluntary and for valid consideration. Clause 2. The parties agreed to release Isla Simmons from any and all claims regarding the management of Lumina. Clause 3. The parties agreed to vacate the property within 30 days. I read it over. It was a surrender treaty. Now I had to get them to sign it. I sent a text to the group chat. Me, Mom, Dad, Sloan, I am willing to make a deal. The response was immediate. Diane called. Isla? Isla, are you there? Look, we are sorry. We were panicked. Please, honey, we can fix this. Just give us the house back. Evan is threatening to leave Sloan. He is asking for a financial audit of the wedding funds. I cut her off. I am not giving the house back. Mom, that is done, but I am willing to save Sloan's wedding. Diane went silent. How? I have prepared a settlement agreement. I lied. It is a document that clarifies the financial situation. If you and Dad sign it, I will show it to Evan. I will tell him that the fraud was a misunderstanding, a bookkeeping error that we have resolved. I will tell him that the house transfer is a legitimate estate planning move that we all agreed on. I will calm him down. And the police? Graham's voice came from the background. He was listening on speaker. No police. I said, no IRS reports. No exposing the forgery. I bury everything. I let you play the rich, happy family for the wedding. What is the catch? Graham asked. He was suspicious, but he was desperate. He saw his social standing crumbling. The catch is the house stays mine. I said, and you sign the paper confirming it, and you move out in 30 days. But I will let you stay until after the wedding, so you don't lose face. I dangled the bait, the appearance of normalcy. That was their drug. They would do anything to keep the neighbors from talking. 30 days after the wedding? Diane asked, her voice hopeful. Yes, I said. You get to host the reception. You get to pretend everything is perfect. Then you leave. There was a muffled consultation on the other end. I heard Sloan crying, saying, just do it. Dad, I can't lose Evan. Fine, Graham barked. We will sign. Bring the papers to the house. No, I said, not the house. The house is too emotional. We meet at a neutral location. I gave them the address of a shared workspace downtown where I had rented a conference room for the afternoon. 1 hour, I said, and bring your IDs. I arrived at the workspace early. It was a glass-walled fishbowl of an office, modern and sterile. I paid an extra $50 to the facility manager to have the security camera in the corner turned on and recording to a thumb drive. Then I called a second mobile notary. Not Megan. I needed a fresh face. I called a man named Arthur, a retired paralegal who did notary work for extra cash. He sounded grumpy and meticulous. Perfect. My family arrived at 2 o'clock. They looked like a wreckage. Diane's makeup was smudged. Graham looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. Sloan was wearing sunglasses inside, likely to hide swollen eyes. They walked into the conference room and sat down on one side of the table. I sat on the other. Arthur sat at the head, organizing his stamps. Is this it? Graham asked, looking at the document. This is it, I said. I slid the papers across. They read them. They saw the clauses about the house. They winced. But then they saw the clause about confidentiality, the clause that promised my silence. You promise you fix this with Evan? Sloan asked, her voice trembling. You promise you tell him it was just a mistake? I will tell him we have resolved all financial discrepancies, I said, which is true. Graham picked up the pen. He looked at me with a hatred that was so pure it was almost impressive. You are a cold-hearted snake. Isla, he whispered, I am what you made me. Dad, I replied. He signed. Diane signed. Sloane signed as a witness. Arthur stamped each signature with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of the cage door locking. But this time, I wasn't inside. Arthur finished his logbook. He handed the originals to me. I checked them. Perfect. A voluntary, notarized, video-recorded agreement where they admitted the house was mine and released me from all liability if they ever tried to sue me. This document would get the case dismissed in 5 minutes. I stood up. Thank you. Arthur, I said. Arthur nodded and left the room. My family sat there, looking at me, expecting the reconciliation, expecting the hug, expecting me to say, okay, let's go call Evan together. I put the documents in my bag. I zipped it shut. Isla? Diane said. Call him. Call Evan. I looked at them. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was relief, the crushing weight of their expectations, their debts, their lies. It was all gone. I am not calling Evan. I said. Sloane stood up. What? You promised. You said you would fix it. I lied. I said simply. The room exploded. Graham jumped up, knocking his chair over. You breached the contract, he shouted. Read the contract. Dad, I said, pointing to the copy on the table. Clause 5. This agreement constitutes the entire understanding between the parties. No oral representations are binding. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn in 2 days. I promised nothing in writing about Evan. I only promised confidentiality regarding the crimes, and I will keep that promise. I won't go to the police. I won't report the tax fraud. I walked to the door. But Evan already knows. I sent him the proof this morning. The fix was just to get you here to sign this paper so you couldn't sue me later. Sloane screamed. It was a primal, animal sound. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing at the air. You bitch! You destroyed my life! Graham held her back. But his face was purple. We aren't moving out, he roared. You will have to drag us out. 30 days, I said, checking my watch. The clock starts now. And Dad, if you damage 1 inch of drywall, or if a single fixture goes missing, I will consider it a breach of the confidentiality clause. And then I will send the recordings to the IRS. I opened the door. Enjoy the wedding, I said, if there still is one. I walked out of the conference room, down the hall, and into the elevator. I watched the numbers count down. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened to the lobby. I walked out into the street. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. I took a deep breath. It was over. The trap had snapped shut. They were defeated. But as I walked to my car, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Evan. I read the file. All of it. I'm coming to see you. I stared at the screen. The war with my family was over. But the aftermath was just beginning. I had saved myself. But I had burned the world down to do it. Now, I had to stand in the ashes and see who was left standing with me. The text message from Evan Caldwell felt like the final vibration of a phone that had been buzzing with disaster for 48 hours. I am coming to see you. It was not a request. It was a subpoena delivered via SMS. I sat in my car, watching the city traffic bleed into the afternoon gray. I knew exactly what Evan had found in that package. He had seen the forged signature on the wedding contract. He had seen the credit card authorization. But most terrifyingly for him, he had seen the copy of the waiver of spousal interest he had signed in my parents' dining room, the document that proved he was present and consenting during the fraudulent transfer of the house. He wasn't just a groom anymore. He was an accessory. I drove to a quiet park halfway between his office and the co-working space when his Porsche pulled in. He didn't park smoothly. He jerked the car into the space, the tires crunching aggressively against the curb. He got out. He looked impeccable in his suit, but his eyes were wild. You set me up, he said, striding toward me. You handed me a pen, told me it was standard estate planning, and you made me sign a document that links me to a federal crime. I leaned against my car, crossing my arms. I did. I admitted calmly. I needed leverage. Evan, my parents were going to frame me for a felony. I needed to make sure that if I went down, I wouldn't go down alone. And I knew the only thing that would make you turn on them is if your own neck was on the block. He stopped, breathing hard. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see the quiet, mousy sister-in-law. He saw the predator I had become. My father is the district attorney. Evan hissed, if it comes out that I signed off on a shell company transfer to hide assets from the IRS, my career is over before it starts. Then you have a choice, I said. You can stick with Sloan in the Holloways and hope my recordings never leak, or you can help me finish this properly. What do you want? He asked. I want a clean record. I said, I want a document, signed by Graham and Diane, that explicitly states they opened those accounts without my knowledge. A sworn affidavit, not just a settlement agreement, but a confession. They will never sign that. Evan said, that is admitting to identity theft. They will if you tell them to, I replied, because right now, you are the only thing they have left. They think they can still save the wedding. They think if they keep quiet, you will still marry Sloan. I looked him in the eye. Tell them the wedding is off unless they sign the affidavit. Tell them it is the only way you can legally distance yourself from their mess. Evan stared at the ground. He ran a hand through his perfect hair. He was calculating the odds. He was a lawyer. After all, he knew when to cut a losing client loose. Set it up, he said. The final act took place 2 hours later, back in the same glass-walled conference room. My parents and Sloan had returned, summoned by a call from Evan that I can only imagine sounded like an execution order. When I walked in, the atmosphere was toxic. Graham looked like he wanted to strangle me. Diane was weeping softly into a tissue. Sloan was staring at Evan, who was standing by the window, looking out at the street, refusing to make eye contact with her. I sat down. I placed a new document on the table. This is the end of the road, I said. Graham glared at me. We already signed your settlement. Isla, we gave you the house. What more do you want? Blood? I want the truth. I said. I slid the document toward him. It was titled Affidavit of Fact and Admission of Liability. This document, I explained, my voice clinical and cold, details the history of the Lumina accounts. It states that you, Graham and Diane Holloway, used my personal identifying information to open credit lines without my consent. It states that the startup loan was used for personal expenses, and it states that you attempted to coerce me into taking legal responsibility for these actions. Graham shoved the paper away. I am not signing that. That is a confession to a federal crime. You said you wouldn't go to the police. I am not going to the police. I said, I am sending this to the credit bureaus and the IRS to clear my name. It is an administrative correction. It is prison, Graham shouted. It is necessary. Evan's voice cut through the room. Everyone turned. Evan turned away from the window. His face was pale but hard. Evan? Sloan whispered. I read the file, Evan said, looking at Graham. I saw the credit card authorization Isla sent me. Sloan forged her sister's signature to pay for our wedding flowers. Sloan gasped. Evan, Stop. Evan snapped. Just stop. And you? Graham, you had me sign a waiver witnessing a fraudulent property transfer. You made me a party to this. He walked over to the table and placed his hands on the mahogany surface. I am not going to be disbarred for this family. I am not going to prison for you. You are going to sign that affidavit. You are going to admit that Isla had nothing to do with it, and that I had nothing to do with it. But Evan, Diane wailed, if we sign this, what happens to us? That is not my problem, Evan said. If you don't sign it, I am walking out of here and going straight to my father's office. I will report the fraud myself to get ahead of it. I will turn you in. The silence that followed was absolute. Graham looked at Evan. He saw the end of the line. The Caldwell alliance was dead. The shield was gone. Isla, Graham rasped, turning to me. 2 years. You said 2 years in minimum security wouldn't kill you. Why couldn't you just do it? Why did you have to burn everything down? I looked at him. I remembered the way he had slid that folder across the desk, the way he had valued my life at 0, because I am not the one who committed the crime. Dad, I said, I pointed to the affidavit. Sign it, and I promise, I will submit it through my lawyer. It will be a correction of record. It won't be a press conference. It will be quiet, but it will be final. Graham picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at Diane. She nodded, her eyes dead. They had no moves left. Graham signed. Diane signed. I looked at the notary I had hired for this second session, a woman named Sarah, who had set up a video camera on a tripod in the corner. Do you swear that you are signing this voluntarily, without duress, and that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge? Sarah asked. Graham closed his eyes. Yes, Diane whispered. Yes. Sarah stamped the documents. Thud, thud. It was done. I took the folder. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just felt a heavy, exhausting sense of closure. I stood up. My lawyer will handle the filing. I said, the credit bureaus will be notified. My score will be restored. The debt will be transferred to your names. I looked at Sloan. Evan is going to leave you. Sloan. Sloan burst into tears, reaching for Evan's hand. But he pulled away. It is over. Sloan, Evan said, the wedding is off. I can't be attached to this. He looked at me. He nodded. Once, a gesture of respect from one survivor to another. Then he walked out of the room. Sloan screamed after him, but he didn't turn back. I walked to the door. Isla, my mother cried out. Where are we supposed to go? If the IRS sees this affidavit, they will come for the restitution. They will take everything. I stopped and turned back one last time. You have the house for 30 days, I said. I suggest you use that time to sell the furniture. Graham slammed his fist on the table. You are heartless, he shouted. We are old. How can you send your own parents to face this? 2 years. Isla, it would have been 2 years for you. You are young. You could have bounced back. 2 years is nothing. I paused. I looked at them, the wreckage of their vanity and their greed. You are right, Dad, I said softly. I opened the door. 2 years in minimum security won't kill you. I smiled. So go prove it. I walked out of the building and into the cool evening air. The streetlights were just flickering on. I called my lawyer and told him the package was on its way. The investigation that followed was not the dramatic, televised raid my parents feared. It was slow. It was bureaucratic. It was a grinding machine of audits and penalties. With the affidavit in hand, the IRS and the creditors shifted their sights from me to Graham and Diane. The debts were reassigned. The penalties were assessed. They were not arrested immediately, but their world was dismantled. The country club membership was revoked. The cars were repossessed. And when the 30 days were up, I did not have to evict them. They left in the middle of the night, ashamed to face the neighbors, moving into a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. The house, my house, was sold. I didn't keep it. I couldn't live in a monument to their ego. I sold it to a nice family with 3 kids and a golden retriever. I used the money to pay off the remaining legitimate debts, clear my student loans, and put a down payment on a small, modern condo with a view of the river. Sloan tried to call me a few times. She left voicemails blaming me for ruining her life, for scaring Evan away. I never listened to them all the way through. I blocked her number. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, trying to find another rich husband. I went back to work at Bishop and Rowe. I got a promotion. My colleagues noticed a change in me. They said I seemed sharper, tougher. One night, 6 months later, I found myself back at that diner, the same one where I had sat in my car and audited my own life. This time, I went inside. I sat in a booth by the window. I ordered a burger and a milkshake. I watched the cars go by on the highway, their headlights cutting through the darkness. I thought about what my mother had said. You are the dirt. Isla, you are the soil. She had meant it as an insult. She had meant that I was something to be walked on, something to be buried. I took a sip of my milkshake and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I looked tired, but I looked solid. I looked real. She was right. I was the dirt, but she forgot one thing about dirt. Dirt is what holds the foundation. Dirt is what survives the storm. Flowers rot. Flowers wilt. Flowers die when the winter comes. But the dirt is still there when the snow melts. I paid my check. I tipped the waitress $20, and I walked out into the night, ready to build something of my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but I hope you enjoyed watching the audit unfold as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work in London? Cooking dinner in Texas? Or maybe relaxing in a cafe in Hanoi? Please leave a comment below and let me know. I love reading about where our community is growing. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and justice, please consider subscribing to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to help the algorithm find us. And if you really want to support the channel, smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need a reminder that being the quiet one is a superpower. Stay sharp, stay safe, and remember, check your credit report.